I still don't find it normal to witness armed conflict, brute force, bombs going off. I find those things abnormal, and that's a good thing. That's the way I photograph. If I lost that sense, I wouldn't be able to do the job anymore. I think I was naive in the early 90s. I didn't want to believe that war happened at all. And at the same time, I had no sense of what bullets and bombs could actually do. I was lucky back then. Nowadays, I'm using my wits above all else. A photographer who gets shot won't do anyone any good. I'm very fortunate. I found what I always wanted to do with my life, and that's so rare. You only have one life, and if you're lucky enough to do what you want to do, then you're really blessed.
Early in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning or something, New York time, I got woken up by my colleague Manuccio Degati in Cairo. He called me up, very upset. And I knew that if he was upset, something bad had happened. And so he told me that there had been some kind of incident involving Anja and Kathy, and the information was still coming in.
There was a deadly attack on 2 veteran Associated Press journalists.
An Associated Press photographer has been killed, and an AP reporter seriously wounded in a shooting in Afghanistan.
The shooting happened this morning in Khost province. Photographer Anja Niedringhaus and reporter Kathy Gannon were traveling with election workers and under the protection of Afghan soldiers and police.
You see a news flash, photographer killed in Afghanistan, and you're like, Jesus, I hope it's not somebody that I know, And then immediately I saw it was AP and it was a woman. I didn't have details at first, and I was sure it was Anja.
I was shocked, even if I didn't know her, because every single time we lose a photographer, I'm always saying that our eyes on the world are closing a little bit more.
It was surreal and hard to believe. I think it wasn't really till the next day I went out and I took a photograph of the New York Times in a newsstand with Anja's picture on it. And it became like, this really happened.
The thoughts and prayers of the First Lady and the President go out to the family of Anja Niedringhaus, who was killed in Afghanistan overnight.
When good colleagues die, it's like death has caught up with you. You ask yourself if it's worth it. But none of the good friends I've lost would have told me to stop, and none of them would have stopped either.
I'm Kathy Gannon. I'm a Canadian journalist. I've been a journalist for nearly 50 years, 35 of those with Associated Press, and mostly in conflict areas, covering, for the most part, Pakistan and Afghanistan, until April 4th, 2014, on the eve of the elections.
There's no stable democracy in Afghanistan. Can police protect the more than 6,000 polling stations opening tomorrow nationwide? 5 years ago, there was massive electoral fraud. Irregularities are expected this time as well.
Anja was convinced that she would not stay in Kabul, so I knew that. And she said, I don't care where we go as long as it's not here. And so we had said, we'll go to Khost because I knew the governor there.
See, they were looking for a different part of the story there, Afghanistan people voting that, we had people that were in Kabul that could do that. So they were always looking for a new angle, a different way to tell a story.
Anja had this image in her mind of people coming down from the mountains to vote and having this panoramic look at Afghanistan and the difficulty of casting the vote and what somebody had to do to get to the polling station. So when we decided on Khost, I got in touch with the governor. He said, yes, you could stay in my compound.
At that time, all the Khost province districts were really secure. There was no problem, no attacks, anything in Khost province.
My only concern was the drive, which is, 3 hours. It's over a pass. It's a heavy Taliban area. Then I asked Cairo if it would be possible for us to drive to Khost. They had given us the permission to go to Khost.
There was a great convoy to supply the election boxes to the election sites.
And we drove right in to the police compound. I remember the walls were like a yellowy color and a big gate. So we were out talking to the police, and Anja was taking her pictures, and Nishan was doing the video of Deputy Police Chief explaining to all these guys and telling them what they had to do, showing them the ballot boxes. And it went on for maybe about half an hour, 45 minutes. And then the last thing I remember that they were telling the police was they handed them these first aid kits. And I remember
when rainfall started, Anja said that, Nishan, can you open the car? Because he had 2 cameras with her.
We were both sitting in the back seat. Anja was right beside me because she put her cameras on the seat beside her.
Kathy gave a chocolate to Anja, and she gave one chocolate to me, and I came out from the car, brought the chocolate to the translator because he's not drink the morning tea. He has not taken the morning tea.
And the next thing I remember is feeling like I was being pushed, and I thought a bomb had gone off underneath us. And I remember thinking or saying, now we're finished. And I could feel Anja on my shoulder, and neither one of us had fallen over. And I remember I couldn't move because all the bullets were in my upper body, and I couldn't move. And I just remember my head looking over, and I saw Anja's white hair, and I remember thinking, looked fine, and she wasn't saying anything, and I just remember saying, please help us.
When I saw the guy was on the ground, was arrested by the government forces, and then I turned back to the car. When I came to the car, look inside the car, just the smells of explosives was coming out. Smokes of the explosive was coming outside of the car. Saw Kathy and Anja inside the car.
I just remember thinking that it would just be like my last breath and I would just die, and I wanted to go peacefully. So I remember thinking, I've had a good life, and I kept breathing, thinking, okay, maybe this will be my last one now.
Bad day. It was very bad day. Yeah. And just in a moment, everything changed.
I do remember very, very vividly the day the attack happened on them. I was informed probably immediately. Then I immediately picked up the phone and said to my own government and to the US military authorities that they need to be given the best care and send them helicopters. I was, for a good part of the day, focused on the evacuation of Kathy and Anja. She lost her life in an attack that was most probably motivated from outside of Afghanistan, or motivated by someone who thought that someone was hurting Afghanistan, wherever. So it was a sad day, but in mysterious circumstances.
What qualities do you need to do what you do?
A certain openness so that you can approach people. That's essential. Also a kind of relaxed attitude. A sense of humor. Otherwise you can't process a lot of things. Also curiosity. And spontaneity.
Does a photographer have to love people?
Yes, definitely. And I can't do studio photographs because I hate staged pictures. It's so nice when you see people just interacting naturally and you become part of it. The best thing is when they don't even notice you. That's how you get the most beautiful photos. If you were to put me in a studio tomorrow and ask me to arrange a shoot, it would be a disaster. I couldn't do it.
Thanks.
Can I smoke now?
It's hard to describe her smile, the energy. Like, she literally radiated positive energy. And of course, I wasn't spending time with Anja at her home or in social situations. We were in war zones together. So that's even more remarkable that somebody could be both on the job, there with the people, feeling the emotional impact, but also finding the time to find the silver lining.
I think it was clean, it was pure, it was genuine. It was silver, happy. Great laugh. Awesome.
Of course, she had that infectious laugh. But her whole personality was always really infectious. She was irresistible.
She was warm-hearted, but she was also completely uninhibited. She couldn't have cared less if it was inappropriate to laugh out loud in certain situations. If she had to laugh, she laughed. And then she gradually infected everyone else with her laughter. She was a real charmer, in the positive sense.
Eigentlich ein Menschenfänger im positiven Sinne.
There's a 4-year age gap between my eldest daughter, Elke, and Anja. I'd thought I definitely wouldn't have any more children. But then we moved to Höxter into a newly built house, and immediately I was pregnant. And that was Anja. Anja was born in 1965. She was 4 years younger than Elke. And then, right after, I got pregnant again, with Gide. The age gap is very small, and it was really difficult for me to have another child so soon. So in that respect, it was good that Anja was such a calm and easygoing child.
I don't have a brother. We were 3 girls. But nobody ever said, "Oh, you're a girl, you can't play here, you'll get all dirty, or you'll be too scared." We did a lot of crazy things growing up. It was just as if we'd grown up as 3 boys.
Some kids weren't allowed in the woods, or they had to be home before dark. But not us. We could do anything.
Anja's father loved to ride motorcycles. He was really reckless. He rode off-road motorcycles and jumped through rings of fire. I know that the children constantly had burns on their calves from climbing onto his motorcycle.
We were also allowed to drive a car without a license. We could do lots of things that other children weren't allowed to do. So we were able to have our own experiences without any fear.
Anja loved motorcycles the most, more than Elke and Gide.
Sometimes we called Anja our brother. We also called her Arno for fun, because she had this technical side to her and wasn't so interested in typically girly things.
Anja and I both started university in October 1986. We both studied German literature and journalism. Anja was one of the few journalism students who already had experience. She'd been taking photos for the Neue Westfälische newspaper in Höxter. She'd gotten her start while she was still in school, and quite soon after that, she'd started as a freelance photographer for the Göttinger Tageblatt newspaper. What led to her ultimately getting a job at the European Press Photo Agency, it wasn't quite that she was discovered. What happened was we found out that the German agency DPA was advertising a photography traineeship.
She called me and said, "I have to write a resume. I'm going to apply." And I said, "But you're still studying." And the photo she wanted to use for the application was her wearing a helmet in a silver mine. I thought it was a terrible idea. I said, "You don't put something like that on an application." But she insisted.
As soon as Anja walked in, the head of photography said, "Are you the woman with the helmet?" We always joked about that photo afterwards. Then they told her that based on her application, they didn't think they could teach her anything more, that she didn't need to do a traineeship. Instead, they offered her a position at the European Press Photo Agency, EPA. They were hiring photographers for the first time.
für die EPA-Fotografen einstellen.
I think she was the first woman at the European Press Photo Agency. And they didn't really know what to do with a woman on assignment. They wanted to protect her and keep her safe. And in that sense, they didn't have confidence in her.
I started as an agency photographer in 1990. When the war in Croatia broke out, I felt it was my duty to go there and take photos, rather than just doing pure assignment journalism. It took a lot of persuasion in the editorial office before they said, okay, we'll let a woman go to Sarajevo. It took 2 or 3 months to convince them. It's quite a male-dominated field, and you often have to assert yourself more than a male colleague would. At first it was very, very difficult. I remember first arriving in Croatia in 1991 during the war. I travelled with a Bulgarian colleague and he didn't accept me being there at all. He didn't even talk to me. After about 2 hours he asked me what I, as a woman, was doing there. The question alone upset me. I was very upset about it. He had a lot more experience at the time because he had worked in many more conflict zones. But I stayed there for a long time, and I think I showed him that I was very good at the job. We're still very good friends, and we meet again and again in conflict zones. And each time he remembers that question he asked me and laughs. Now I've become part of the team, so it's not a big deal anymore.
There are a few, 3, 4 women who are continually photographing Bosnia, and probably 30 or 40 men, right, who are continually doing it. There may be more men and more women who are doing it periodically. Going to war has always been in history a male occupation, right? Suffering the indignity of war in your own home, in your own city, is often being portrayed as the role of women, right? Losing your husbands, lovers, and sons to war has typically been the role of women. So I think the role models for young men wanting to get into journalism, in photojournalism, let's say, aren't necessarily other photojournalists, but it might go all the way back to Achilles, right? The warriors of the past, men going off, as I did, to test myself. And what better place to test yourself if you are a young man than in a war? It's the stuff of legends, right? For women, there are role models, but there are less role models. And I think the women who do choose to go, that's certainly of my generation, were extraordinarily brave, extraordinarily courageous, intellectually courageous, as well as physically courageous.
I've always thought that women are more resilient. They're tougher. They're more at peace with themselves. They just say, well, I agree to this. I know how difficult it is for a woman to even get an assignment like that. It takes a whole lot of persistence.
God, so many memories. That's inside an armoured car in... It must be Bosnia. Sarajevo, I guess. Looks like Sarajevo. Yeah, that's how she was when I met her. AFP Anja.
I think I met Anja for the first time in Sarajevo, walking outside of a cemetery, the main cemetery in Sarajevo, which was getting full every day with victims of the siege. And as I recall, either she caught up to me or I caught up to her. And I was like, who is this person? What is she doing here? In part because it was unusual to see women journalists in places like that. In part because she had a big smile and was very friendly and warm. And I think that's where our friendship began.
Many of the female photographers I know who have photographed war probably had a much better understanding of what war was than the male photographers who are doing the same thing. And I think you need to get past the sort of orthodox way of thinking about war if you're going to photograph it well. And I think most people don't photograph wars very well at all, and that has included me. And I've photographed many wars, and I think I've probably only photographed one well. And I think that the women I know who went to war are every bit as brave and capable as the men, but I do think they had a slightly different take on war, and I think the work is different.
Maybe it's a bit more emotional. I don't know if that's because I'm a woman. To this day, I still have no idea what kind of tank or gun I'm looking at. I'm not interested in that at all. I don't know anything about the weapons. The men know those things, and I think that maybe that distracts them a bit sometimes.
You know, a lot of war coverage, and historically maybe a lot of war coverage has been focused on the actual act of war itself. People firing guns and all that, what are known in the business as bang-bang pictures. And while there's certainly something very compelling about the sound of gunfire, and it attracts photographers like a moth to a flame, at the end of the day, it's just pictures of people running around with guns, and one is much the same as the other. She could show the most terrible things as well. I mean, it's not like she was sugarcoating the world, not at all. And, you know, she has her fair share of pictures that show that too. But I think she was a very human photographer, and that's what was reflected in her work.
Sarajevo's sniper alley sought out its latest target. He was just 7 years old. It hasn't worked. The boy's young sister and mother see that for themselves as they accompany him on his last journey.
How detached are you? Do you still have compassion? Or are you a reporter who points the camera, gets the image, and then gets it out of your head as soon as possible?
I actually think I feel more compassion than I used to. The first few times I was in Sarajevo, I was too shocked. I couldn't even wrap my head around the fact that I was standing there. Somehow, I couldn't believe it was real. But since then, I've made a lot of friends in Sarajevo because I've been going back there for years. I feel a bit like one of them, so my compassion has grown.
A lot of journalists fall in love, right, in these places, and there's a reason why. You know, you need that human experience, right? You cry a lot, you need to laugh, and you need to introduce some kind of normality into your life at these times to be able to survive it, and that's what civilians do too. In fact, in Bosnia, you know, I can't remember laughing so much in any war as I did in Bosnia with Bosnians.
Really a great feeling of camaraderie in the fact that we were really trying to do something and believed in what we were doing.
Early on, when I was in Sarajevo as an agency photographer, I thought that we could achieve something with our photographs. Many of my colleagues thought the same. But after 2 years, nothing had happened in terms of NATO policy or anything. There'd been nothing that had really helped the people. That's when I realized that even though I could achieve something, it wasn't what I had imagined.
Yes, we were very young, and I guess could not imagine that so many of us would not survive, right? Yeah.
I certainly don't have as normal a personal life as people with a more regular lifestyle. And that doesn't bother me in and of itself. But over time, it takes quite a toll on your nerves to be away all the time and miss out on a lot of personal things. I think that pretty soon I'll set more priorities in terms of my personal life. Because at some point, before you know it, your time is up. I mean, I still enjoy it a lot, but it does take over your life.
Einnehmend, das Ganze.
She was smart enough to know that you can't do this job and have a normal personal life. I think she was well aware of that.
Anja had lots of friends. Friendships were always important to her. But she never wanted to be tied down. I think she was always a bit afraid of losing her independence.
I can't imagine being 50 and still running around in conflict zones. I don't want that. At some point, I'll have to make a clean break and say, this has been really interesting, but that's enough now. And then maybe I'll do something quieter, editorial work or something with a normal daily newspaper. But I think you have to be careful because agency work can wear you out. It's like burning the candle at both ends. At some point, maybe in 5 years, I'll think that was good, it was interesting, but now it's time for something else.
Have there been situations where you feared death?
Oh, yes.
Are there rules in those situations? Things you're definitely not supposed to do?
Yes, I'd say so, but they're more like guidelines that everyone sets for themselves.
An Afghan police officer has been sentenced to death for the fatal shooting of German photographer Anja Niedringhaus. The court in Kabul found police officer Naqibullah guilty of murder. According to the court's reasoning, the Islamist perpetrator is said to have acted spontaneously and alone.
This is the indictment document we have from the Afghan side. It lists the defendant and his personal details. Naqibullah, son of Muhammad Nasir. The files on Naqibullah, the perpetrator, tell us quite a lot. He finished the 12th grade and then went to the police academy in Mazar-e-Sharif for a 6-month course. He was trained by Afghan instructors as well as U.S. advisors. Then quite quickly, he was transferred to the province of Khost in the southeast, which is where the killing took place. The police force has always been one of the biggest problems when it comes to developing the Afghan state. It was deeply corrupt and permeated by the networks of various political and military organizations. After the Taliban, Hezb-e Islami was the second most important armed insurgent group, albeit a distant second.
I was assigned this case when I was a judge at the Supreme Court of Appeal for crimes against internal and external security in Kabul. The case had already been tried in the first instance, and the defendant had been sentenced to death. When the case came before the Court of Appeal, the presiding judge assigned it to me. I oversaw the proceedings, and we made a ruling.
I wouldn't be aware of all this investigation, and I wasn't made privy to it. Nobody questioned me other than the Germans in Germany. Other than that, I wasn't questioned by anybody. I wasn't asked what happened. I wasn't asked where we were. So, or even his evidence, for example, in court, I wasn't asked to respond to his evidence in court. The only thing that I was told quickly afterward was that the Taliban had denied responsibility. So I had been told that specifically, so that I knew.
What surprised me when reading the files was that the German Federal Criminal Police Office, the BKA, didn't pursue the case further. The BKA had investigated partly because of suspicions that a terrorist organization was involved. But apparently, it was enough that the Taliban denied responsibility for the attack. And yet, German authorities knew there were other armed groups besides the Taliban, like Hezb Islami. They knew this group was fighting the government and had claimed responsibility for these sorts of attacks. So it was basically clear that Hezb Islami could have played a role. It was a lead that should have been pursued. I'm surprised it wasn't. The files also show how the Afghan authorities discovered that the perpetrator had traveled to Pakistan on the grounds of seeking medical treatment. But according to the intelligence services, he may have actually attended a terrorist training camp in Pakistan.
All terrorist groups maintained training camps in Pakistan. The country supported Al-Qaeda and other terrorists. Naqibullah was one of those who was trained there. The training was carried out by Pakistani generals and high-ranking members of various terrorist groups. The goal was to carry out attacks in Afghanistan.
But in that case, he shouldn't have been allowed back into the police force.
After 9/11 and the invasion of Afghanistan happened, Anja, in the 10 years that I hadn't seen her, her work was outstanding. You know, the work she did for EPA was very, very good. And she loved EPA, and she loved people at EPA even more. She was very fond of them. But, you know, it was time to progress her career. And so I contacted her in 2002, and we had a meeting.
And I remember hearing, I think I was in Spain at the time, hearing the news that she'd joined the AP and being so excited because she was really an excellent professional, an excellent photographer.
She was based in Kuwait first, And once the invasion happened, she was in Baghdad for a considerable amount of time. So that's how we met. I was her boss initially, but we became very close friends over the years. She was the person that I, as her boss, would be the first person I'd want to send somewhere. For a number of reasons, apart from her talent, you could trust Anja. You know, she knew that the whole point, you've got to keep people safe, and that was from my point of view, I knew that I could send Anja and she wouldn't do anything, unsafe, and she wouldn't let people around her do anything unsafe.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war.
I met her, I believe, in 2003 or 2004. We were in Baghdad together. She was in the Associated Press Bureau, which was right next to ours. And so, we would hang out together, a group of photographers. We shot some demonstrations together, covered some car bombings together. And there would be an angry crowd, and sometimes they would turn on the journalists. You'd have militias, military with guns. I mean, it was hectic. And, she was somebody that would watch your back. She was someone that would, help get you out of things or warn you if something didn't look good. She would say, keep your eye out over here. I think this is going to blow up. Maybe it's time to go. She was a real professional. She was somebody that you wanted to work with. I worried about Anja as the competition. It was kind of, I hate to say it, but it was like you would go into Baghdad and you had to see who was there, and because people did rotations, they would come for 3 months or 6 months and leave. And if you went in and Anja was there, it was a problem, because she was going to take great photos. And the New York Times would use her photos if they were better than my photos. And, it was a problem for me. So it was always like, oh, God, Anja's here, disaster, But there were a few photographers like that. She was one of them.
Anja did a fantastic job with mentoring the local people in Baghdad. She was hard, but she would, she'd look at their work and be very critical, but also guide them. It wasn't meant in a bad way, but so her mentoring was actually another often not talked about.
Sometimes I feel a bit bad when I fly out. I think I'm getting out of here. Tomorrow I'll be in Amman, and after that I'll be home. Meanwhile, the locals have to stay and deal with all this mess. How does normal life go on? It's that ability to keep going out over a long and difficult period. It's not only we Western correspondents who are in the line of fire, they are too. Because when they're holding a camera, everyone knows they work for some international agency. So they're risking their lives every day to report the news from their country without that sense that they can then leave. Most of them don't even have a passport. I just fly in and say, okay, now I'm here. And then I focus on the job 24/7, but I don't have to worry about things like going shopping or getting clean water or not having electricity at home because there's no generator or having children who are sick. So I think these people should be in the spotlight much, much more.
When I became director of photography at the AP in late 2003, Anja's role changed from, being I suppose, a colleague in the field to being an employee, which comes with its own set of complications. And around the time of, I think it was the second battle to retake Fallujah, and Anja was embedded with the Marines at what you would call the sharp end of the stick.
Fallujah was the first time I was embedded. There was no other way to cover it. I spent a long time with the unit. You sleep beside them in a house on the floor. You share your food with them. You become part of the group, and you feel a sense of responsibility. They wanted to know all about me, and I wanted to know all about them. I realized how young these soldiers actually are, and when you talk to them, you find out what's really on their minds.
Anja Niedringhaus gets that prize.
In New York, Anja Niedringhaus received the 2005 Pulitzer Prize for breaking news photography, together with a team of colleagues from the Associated Press. The Pulitzer Prize honors outstanding journalism in both words and images. She's the first German photographer to receive a Pulitzer.
The Pulitzer Prize is special because it's known outside the realms of purely journalistic awards. You could compare it to something like a Nobel Prize in the field of science. She was just overjoyed to have won it together with a team. Winning as part of a team meant a lot to her.
Anja Niedringhaus.
Just photographing soldiers with guns doesn't reveal much anymore. Nothing, in fact. But during the capture of Fallujah, we did almost everything on foot. The city was taken on foot because the streets were so narrow. We slept in different houses every night. There was hardly anything to eat. It was pretty tough. So amid all the madness, to see a soldier who'd gone to the trouble of carrying his little mascot, it was really something. I never knew it would win a Pulitzer, though.
Can it get any better than winning a Pulitzer Prize?
Well, you could win more Pulitzer Prizes. But I don't think you should measure in terms of prizes. It should just be about beautiful photos, good photos. And there are still lots of those to take. Millions. So I hope it's not over yet.
Anja and I lived together on the Ellenbach since 1996. At some point, we decided to buy a house of our own, and after looking at a few similar places, we found this old forestry office. What we really wanted was to live in the kind of place that's right in the woods. In the end, we decided on this place. Right now, we're in what used to be, what is, Anja's living room.
Do you pay a personal price for what you do?
I'm getting grey hair. I think personal life is important. You need that. If you come home from an assignment and you're just sitting in some apartment watching the washing machine, that will lead to depression. When I'm home, we don't talk much about my assignments. We have horses and there's always something to do. There'll be work to do on the house. That's very healthy.
The typical phone call from Anja from a conflict zone would be her pretending she wasn't in a conflict zone. She just wanted to know how we were doing. It was a little break for her. She'd ask about everything we were up to here.
Kann ich auch den Film sehen?
Den kannst du nachher sehen. Den kannst du nachher sehen. Was machst du denn da?
It's difficult to explain to someone on the outside. Anja was a very big part of our family. She still is. I can't quite describe it. She was almost like a second mother to me. And I think that's because she took such good care of me and took me on trips. I think I even slept in her bed almost every night. I savored every moment we had together.
Was freut er sich denn da?
Weil die Kamera da ist.
At the time, Hella was still riding ponies. We knew that at some point she'd switch to a horse. And we had always said that we wanted to share the cost of doing that for Hella. I found just the right horse. And on April 2nd, we talked on the phone and agreed that we'd buy it for her together. I never imagined that one day Anja wouldn't be able to come back. For her, it was clear that nothing would happen to her. She radiated confidence, and that always made me believe that Anja would come through everything unscathed. She wanted to slow down, but I think she would have kept delaying the decision to stop.
You've been asked this a lot, but my editors still find it important.
As a woman? I knew it. Well, I was just in Korea for the World Athletics Championships. Out of about 400 accredited photographers, how many women do you think there were?
10.
2. So, there are fewer women in sports than in war zones.
What made and set Anja apart from many, many people is that she was also a fantastic feature photographer. She was an absolutely brilliant sports photographer. She did the hardest job at the Olympics. She was on the finish line running remote cameras. She was in centre court at Wimbledon for I don't know how many years. And she was there because she was good at it. You know, she was the best. That part of Anja is often forgotten.
It was always about the team. At Wimbledon, Anja was always working with the same team. She knew exactly what to expect, and that made everything a little easier. And they spent their evenings together too. They were like family. To be honest, Anja was never that interested in tennis. Back when the children had tennis lessons here, she didn't really get involved at all. She could photograph any sport without having much knowledge of the rules. It was a nice break for her. She sometimes said she found it difficult to switch gears when she came back from a conflict zone. She'd say to herself, "My God, what kind of first world problems are these?"
In my opinion, it's clear that Naqibullah did not commit this act spontaneously. There had been an airstrike in his home region, and the civilian casualties that attack caused played a role.
سلام، به خبرهای این ساعت تولو و شبکه جهانی تولو نیوز خوش آمدید. امروز پنجشنبه 26 ماه جدی سال 1392 هجری خورشیدی و 16 ماه جنوری سال 2014 میلادی است. شما را از باشندگان ولسوالی سیاهگرد در غوربند ولایت پروان در واکنش به کشته شدن 7 کودک و 1 زن در بمباران نیروهای خارجی دست به تظاهرات زدند.
هدفمان دیدار از خانواده‌هایی هستند که کودکان و زنانشان را در عملیات نظامیان خارجی 2 شب پیش در ولسوالی سیاهگرد از دست دادند.
The airstrike caused a lot of outrage, especially in the province of Parwan and in Khorband, Naqibullah's home region. The local Hezbi Islami lawmaker, Abdul Sattar Khawasi, played a major role in that. He traveled to the site of the attack and called on the population to join the jihad against the Americans. And here it becomes clear that a link to the Hezbi Islami network was at least known about. What we're talking about is a phone call that the perpetrator, Naqibullah, made to Khawasi's driver, a man named Aref, both 15 minutes before the crime and 15 minutes afterwards. What I find most interesting is that, according to his own statement, Aref asked Naqibullah why he hadn't organized an escape route for himself after the crime, and that if you plan something like that, you also want to get away somehow.
We couldn't prove that the parliamentarian, Abdul Sattar Khawasi, was directly involved in the attack. But his driver, Aref, had been in contact with Naqibullah. Either there was no evidence to prove Khawasi's involvement, or the prosecution didn't want to investigate in that direction.
It's possible they didn't want to mess with the Hezbi Islami organization or Khawasi, or possibly the group's political leader, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar.
A man I know very well, unfortunately. And I say that seriously, because he once put my name. I once got a call from the Committee to Protect Journalists because he had put my name on a list of people that, should I ever return to Afghanistan, he could not guarantee my safety. It was a death threat.
We are filming you obscured. Do you fear revenge from terrorist networks like the one of Hekmatyar or others?
Yes, absolutely. Most of my relatives are in Afghanistan. We hope that one day peace and security will be restored so that we can return to our homeland and resume our work. But the main thing is that most of our relatives are still there.
Where in Pashtun culture do you kill women? It's the total destruction of Afghanistan culture, and it's led by people like Hekmatyar, who've risen in this entire war that we started against communism in Afghanistan in the 1970s. Lo and behold, what do we have here? A man radicalized and used by somebody like Hekmatyar, the butcher of Kabul, who sent rockets into his own city. It's just something that the West, which is responsible for a lot of this, and I don't mean to talk in such a way as being anti-Western, my goodness, is responsible for, and we have to look at that because it's not going away.
Final question. Where do you see yourself in 10 or 15 years?
Same as now. Right now, I don't have any... Well, my goal is always the same, to do good work. I'm not after this or that achievement. I just want to keep being a good photographer.
I remember 5 years ago you said that when you were 50, you'd be done with conflict zones.
That's changed again.
Afghanistan, I found it when I went there back in the 1990s to be a very seductive place. I mean, it's a very beautiful place. It's a very compelling place. And I think Anja felt that that was a place where she could, be left alone to do her work. And there are many beautiful and compelling pictures to be made there.
But it's also incredibly unforgiving. And to be able to survive with that plus war is a really true testament to the human spirit. And I think that's what she was looking for.
And she made a habit of going back there and figuring out ways to either embed or live cheaply or, which, it's a very compelling lifestyle. You're free. Nobody can control you. You're away. You're out there. You have to check in occasionally, and you have to send pictures occasionally, of course. But it's almost a romantic notion.
Anja and I met here at the AP house in Kabul, and she had just come back from an embed with the Canadians, actually, in Kandahar. And she said, I just came back from an embed. I said, oh, yeah, no, I never do embeds. And she said, well, I do other things as well, because she didn't want me to think that it was just embeds. I said, or she was a military-type reporter. And so I said, no, and we sort of, a little bit of a dance between the two of us. And then that evening, we were out on the balcony here and having a couple of glasses of wine, and we started talking. And we drank until 4 in. She was getting on the flight the next day. Don't know how she did it, because I think she left for the airport like 6 o'clock, and we could barely walk straight by the time we went to bed. And it was as if we'd known each other forever. As if we had known each other forever.
Ultimately, I think it's about finding humanity, even in war. Because people keep living their lives. Life goes on there just as it does for us here. It has to. Otherwise, they'd all give up. In Afghanistan, there are farmers who keep on working their fields. Children keep going to school even though there's war. I think that's what keeps the country alive. The fact that despite this crazy world, the people try to carry on with their normal lives.
These people are incredible. And pretty much anybody you meet under the age of, 60 or so, has only known war their entire life. The perspective in Afghanistan is just so different, and so I can see why Anja would be so intrigued and so in admiration, and I think even more so in admiration of the women, and the show is so incredibly strong.
Anja and Kathy stayed in Afghanistan for months. They were the last ones there. Everyone else had already moved on to Libya and Syria. The two of them felt that someone still had to report on what was happening in Afghanistan, and they didn't let anything deter them from that.
When with an international agency, they dictate what you cover. That's just, that's life. When you're being paid a salary, you've got to do what they want you to do. But Anja found a way around these things. She still spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, and she did great stories with Kathy.
She would always be making the argument that it's not going to cost you anything to have me in Afghanistan. And at some point, that was fine. If she wanted to spend time there, weeks at a time, and the pictures were coming and they were getting used, that was fine.
And yet, she was very strong. And, she'd get places other people didn't go. And what she did on those embeds was very good and very strong. Following it, she stayed close to the soldiers after she left. So particularly, I can just recall the Canadians. They loved her. And she was with them when she got wounded.
This is basically the second before... I don't even know how to say it. It's the second before the attack happened.
This was a year ago, on September 11th, in Kandahar province in Afghanistan. It was my second time with the Canadian unit. We set off very early in the morning on patrol, and we passed through a village. It was the last day of Ramadan. The men were standing outside in beautiful robes. The children were showing me their painted hands. It was a wonderful atmosphere. We were already heading back to our camp. We were on this little path leading out of the village when the first hand grenades came over the wall. I'd just taken the picture of the chicken, so I was a little off to the side. A split second later, hand grenades were thrown over the wall, injuring me and a soldier who came towards me. I was flown out to Kandahar. I was probably lucky. Everything turned out quite well. It could have been very different. The first hand grenade landed on the soldier's head, but I think they have 3 or 4 seconds before they explode. Then it hit the ground and we were struck by the shrapnel.
I tried to gently persuade her that she really had to take a break and get herself checked out. But she didn't want to. She went to Delhi in tremendous pain to do some sports photography. I couldn't stop her.
Anja had a way of making things happen. If she wanted to do something, she generally did. On a personal level, after she was wounded, I wanted her to stop going to Afghanistan. I think she, but she had a passion for it, and I told her, I said, I know you love it, but at some point you should stop doing this, because the more you do it, you increase the odds of something horrible happening.
How did she react?
Oh, shut up, I'm fine.
The camera allows me to focus on what's important. It's a good distraction. But even so, there are things that stick with you afterwards, the smell of blood and so on. You're part of the unit. You take the same risks and you see the same things. We were shot at almost every day. Once, we almost had a crash landing. It wasn't as though I could sit in the back like a passenger and say, take me there and bring me back safely.
How often can you call on your guardian angel?
I don't know. But I hope and believe that my guardian angel knows why I'm doing this.
Anja was a real pro. There's no question about it. And the nature of her death and the fact of her death doesn't mean that she made a bad assessment.
I think we had good luck for a while, and we worked, we covered Afghanistan, and we had this incredible string of good luck. And then it just hit, then it was Joao got his legs blown off, and then Tim was killed, and Chris was killed, and my friend Martin was killed, and then Anja was killed, and then David was killed, David Gilkey was killed, and it just kept going. It was just like this wave of death. It was just kind of like a generation of photojournalists being wiped out. It's a game of chance out there. I know that. I've seen it 1,000 times, but there are certain people that you think are going to be okay. I always thought Anja would be okay.
The Afghan police lieutenant convicted of murdering German photographer Anja Niedringhaus was tried today in the Court of Appeal in Kabul. A lower court had previously sentenced Naqibullah to death.
Seeing Kathy in that condition, I said to myself that the next Afghan I see is a dead Afghan. And I said, how can I be thinking about that? Why would I say that? But that is this feeling that one had.
In Afghanistan, if somebody do an action like this, he must see reaction. The same reaction. He could see the penalty of death because he did a cruel action. He did a great cruel action against the ladies, against the women, because they were not armament ladies, they were not army people. They were just journalists,
How did you feel about that death penalty?
I am against death penalty. And so was Kathy, and so was Anya's parent and all that.
I had actually I met one of the judges, and he asked, why didn't you allow for Nakibullah to be killed? But because Anya didn't believe in the death penalty, her family said, no, we don't believe that he should be put to death, but he should spend his life in jail. And I also don't believe in the death penalty, and I absolutely wanted that he spend his life in jail.
In a historic and controversial moment, notorious Afghan warlord Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, often called the Butcher of Kabul, has returned to the Afghan capital. Hekmatyar, leader of the terrorist group Hezb-e Islami, has promised the Afghan government support in the fight against the Taliban.
I remember watching this on television when President Ghani escorted Hekmatyar back from Pakistan as their man, and in this big ceremony, and he comes up to the front of the room with all the dignitaries of Afghanistan there, and he gives this speech before everybody, many of whose people he has killed, and he has ruthlessly killed so many, and then they accept him back.
The agreement stipulated that Hekmatyar would join the government. In return, members of Hezb-e Islami were released.
It wasn't until later that it was found out that one of them was Nakibullah. I was obviously really very upset about it. I was obviously very emotional about it. Emotional in the right way, and understandably, and without unapologetically. So I was reaching out to everyone, and also keeping in mind that what was possible and the safety of our staff and of myself.
I still worry about that because the guy was, I think, seen in Peshawar after he got out. We got security, fences, barbed wire, and all that, alarm system.
You put it all in afterwards, or?
Yeah, afterwards, yeah. So, all these guards also, they came afterwards. There were no guards before that.
To be honest, I was very upset. He'd received a fair punishment from us, but then he was simply released.
At the moment, I don't know what to say, or what I want to say. I think the decisive factor in this whole affair is the political aspect. I've always thought it was wrong to try to integrate radical structures into a state like Afghanistan, which is still weak, in the hope that long-standing radicalization will then subside. I think it's a high-risk strategy and the wrong one. And as someone who has also worked as a journalist, including in Afghanistan, it's especially painful to see a case like this go unresolved.
Es ist für mich natürlich besonders bitter zu sehen, dass dann so ein Fall letztendlich nicht aufgeklärt wird. Das ist für mich viel schlimmer als...
For me, that's much worse than the injustice of a murder sentence not being carried out. Coming to terms with this in a political sense would be much more important. So in that respect, it's a major failure and hugely disappointing. Not only did Anja Niedringhaus pay for this with her life, but many Afghans did too, because they became targets of the Taliban, Hezb Islami, and others.
I remember getting the call and thinking to myself, this is the worst thing. This is what I was worried about, and now it's happened. And just, of course, you're professional and you deal with it in the sense of, informing her family and helping to coordinate all the various bits and pieces that come with something like that, the repatriation of the body and personal effects, and trying to understand what happened and all of that. And then ultimately coming here to Höxter and speaking at her funeral and I remember up there on the podium, on the altar, at some stage close to the beginning, I remember a huge wave of emotion came, and I stopped and tried to sort of collect myself and then carried on. So I think these emotions for these, for any strong experience comes in waves, and you're never sure when the wave is going to come until it's there, until you're wet.
What do you think what Anja would have said?
I think she just would have laughed and said, "You got to be kidding me. You can go off to war, but you can't make it through a speech in a church. What's the matter with you?" She was tough woman.
We are adrift in a sea of grief. We do not want to let go of Anja. We cannot let go of Anja. She was so alive.
Anja and I used to joke, and I would say, now, if anything happens, I want you to say really nice things about me. And she said, never mind, if it's me, I want you to be sure to make sure you say this or you say that. I wasn't able to go to the funeral because I was in Germany, but I was in the hospital. I was able to send something over to be read at the funeral, but I wasn't able to go. I wasn't able to leave the hospital at all. I close my eyes and I see your smile. I close my eyes and I hear you laugh. We were a hell of a team. I remember some of your last words. I am so happy you said, I love you, mein Schatz. I miss you.